Nobody knows even why some houses are called haunted.
What would you call this place?
Well, diseased, sick, crazy. Such houses are described in the Bible as lepers. Before that, an enormous race for the underworld. A house of Hades.
Hello everybody, this is Irene, host of the Paranormal UK radio show, the flagship show of the Paranormal UK radio network, and joining me tonight with me is, again, once and only, forever and ever, Mark Johnson.
Hello.
I got there in the end.
You got it in. Yeah, you know, we don't tell people how often that we have to re-record that opening. It is a tongue twister.
Well, it's true. It is very true. It is a tongue twister. I've said that before, and it does my brain in. It literally does my brain in. How are you? I'm
doing quite well. How about yourself?
Well, I'm tired. I've been busy, so I'm not quite all there, but, you know, I'm bearing up.
Holding up. You had your grandchildren this weekend.
Up.
You had your grandchildren came this weekend, didn't they?
Two of them, and one of them, the youngest one, I felt so sorry for him, you know. They were so looking forward to coming, and he got ill. He got a tummy bug.
Oh, no.
Puke everywhere.
Yuck.
Yeah, I tell you what, when these kids vomit, they vomit, don't they?
Yeah.
They can eat you 100 yards with it. I'm not kidding you.
A little projectile target practice.
Projectile, God, that's not the word for it. I tell you what, he could have fired it on the farm at 200 yards, well, more than that, and landed it on a cow. He really could. No, I just felt sorry for him. You know, he's only a year old, and of course, when they get ill, what do? They whinge and whinge and whinge, don't they?
Yep.
You know, it just doesn't stop.
Because they don't feel good.
No, a couple of hours goes past, then 6 hours, and 12 hours, and it's still whinging and whinging, and you think, oh my God, I'm going to bang my head on the wall in a minute. But he's better now, that's the main thing. And the little, my granddaughter that was with him, the 3-year-old, she's gone down with it, but up in London. So that's okay. She's not here. I sent them back Sunday night. What about you? What have you been up to? How's the dog?
Oh, he's like nothing ever happened. He is back.
Denzel.
He's back to himself. He's eating us out of house and home. I mean, for a 14-year-old lab rot mix, he's you would have thought he would have gone a couple years ago, and I thought we were going to lose him a couple weeks ago, but he stopped eating. He could barely move. I think he must have had a cold, because now he's like all over the place and happy as a clam.
Yeah, it's like my Denzel. Denzel was the same. He couldn't even stand up. He couldn't walk. He was dragging his back part, you know, along the floor. And we thought, this is it. His hips are gone completely. But few what are they? You know, those things that take anti-inflammatories.
Anti-inflammatories, yes.
Yeah, a few anti-inflammatories later, and he's running down the garden.
There you go. It's
So
amazing.
well, this is it, you know. Like I said, my husband more or less had him written off. I am so glad he didn't take him to the vet, because maybe he wouldn't have brought him back.
Yeah, that's always that fear, and then now you see that he's doing well.
Yeah. In fact, he's up on the sofa now behind me, and he jumps up there himself. So there you go. And he's a big dog. He's a big dog. Anyway, so where are we going now then, Mark? Are you going to introduce our guests?
Yes, let's get right on into the show. Our guest is one of the most frequent guests we've had on the show over the years, talking about a myriad of different topics, because, Nick, I'm going to be honest with you, I don't even know how many books you're up to now, but our guest tonight is Nick Redfern. How are you, Nick?
Hey guys, I'm good, thanks.
Yeah, you know, I do have to ask, Nick. I mean, I know you probably still have
Nick? Come on, how many?
I know you probably got a few more in the works, but how many do you have published right now?
I'm not entirely sure. It's somewhere between about 57 and 62, something like that. But to find out properly, it means I've got to count all them books in the shelves. So we'll go somewhere between 57 and 62.
Good Lord. No,
What was it?
All that counted.
Mark, what was it we were saying earlier about the books?
It's like I think, Nick, you're part alien too. You have alien DNA superpowers to crank out so many books a year.
Well, I actually go, I mean, joking aside, I don't sort of see it as a big issue, because what I like to do, I like to sort of work 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, and that's all I do. I don't work evenings, I don't work weekends. I like to sort of keep what I call job hours. So I get up, have breakfast, watch a bit of TV, and answer a few Facebook messages and whatever, and then I start working at 9 and I finish at 5. And if you get down to it and you work 9 to 5, like, somebody works in an office 9 to 5, you can get a lot done. Now, obviously, I wouldn't want people to think that I just treat it as a job. I don't. It's still my passion, and I still have the enthusiasm for it that I had as a kid. But for me, doing 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, gives me, like I said, evenings off, weekends off to do whatever I want. And then, literally on a Friday afternoon at 4 o'clock, I put the laptop in sleep mode, and then I don't touch it again till 9 o'clock on Monday morning. I don't check Facebook, I don't check Twitter, I don't check email on a Friday after a Friday afternoon till Monday morning. So I really sort of walk away from it, but then come Monday morning, I'll get back to it just like somebody else jumps in the car and heads to the office for 9 to 5.
Well,
sorry.
No, you go ahead, Irene.
It's going to be difficult, this, because you're on the telephone, obviously, Nick, and I'm on Skype, so there's going to be a delay. So I'm sorry if I talk over you at any time. I often talk over Mark, but it doesn't matter with Mark. Sorry, Mark.
No, you're not.
No, but no, I'm not. No. Well, I was going to say, I've been writing my last book now for 4 years. My latest spy book has been 4 years in the making. And I've tried this, I've tried to do what you do, and they just didn't work because I had too much else to do. But then I tried to set certain days of the week aside, which would be the book days. But I got bored. I just couldn't do it.
Well, that was going to be...
I just haven't got the concentration.
That was going to be my question is, working, with a nice regiment like that, what happens when you hit those writer's blocks? Like, do you just put one book aside and start on another?
I don't sort of get much in the way of writer's block, really. I'm sort of pretty structured and know what chapters come in after the next one and things like that. So, for me, I don't really get writer's block. I mean, I guess like when you do a lot of research, you have to do a lot of research. You have to dig out information and track down people and, cold call them and say, hey, heard about your story from 1971. Can I interview you? That kind of thing, So I wouldn't say it's hard, but it's just like you just have to get down and do it. My view is that there's no point, whining like a little kid saying, "Oh, Nick, what am I going to do? What am I going to do?" No, you just have to get down and do it. Regardless of what it is and what the issues might be, you have to get it done because that's what you're doing. So.
Now, how long have you been writing now? When did you first publish your first book?
First book came out in 1997, and that was called A Covert Agenda, and it was all about the earliest British UFO files that were declassified. Over the last few years, a lot of files have come through the UK Freedom of Information Act. But before that, in the 80s through the early 90s, hundreds and hundreds of additional material was released then. A lot of people don't know about those early 1990s releases. And I sort of made those the thrust of that book, A Covert Agenda, and that was the first one, 97. So I've been writing books for 22 years, and I do about roughly 3 books per year.
Well, ironically, we are going to be talking about the 3 books that you've had that have come out this year so far. That's what's going to be our main focus. But, I also want to give a plug that I've been enjoying watching you. I know that you've been on, they interviewed you for quite a few episodes of Ancient Aliens these last couple of seasons. In fact, I just saw you this last Friday's episode when they were talking about Area 51, the whole storming Area 51 event.
Oh, cool. I knew it was going to be on. I didn't see it, but I knew it was going to be on. But, yeah, I mean, I don't sort of do every episode of the show. I just sort of focus on, like with any TV channel or show, if I've got interest in the show and I know the background and the story, then I'll do it. But, there's a lot of things also that I have no interest in, and I don't, and there's no point, sort of going on a TV show where you've got no interest in it at all. It's just pointless. So that's why you don't see me on all of these shows, because certain things I couldn't care less about, so I could.
Well, yeah, there's a couple episodes I scratched my head about, and it's like, you guys really made an episode about that? But I will give credit. Ancient Aliens was suffering there for a few years. It's like they were really struggling on trying to keep it going after the first couple of years. But they seem to have found a new groove. In the last couple of seasons, I really like the directions they've been going in. And it's been a lot more interesting, and from a production standpoint, knowing how I make these shows, isn't it usually like they come at you with questions on several different topics, and interview you at once, and then they could split it out over a few episodes?
No, usually it's, whatever episode they want me in, usually it's just that, the questions just relate to that, that episode, and then if they want me for another episode, they'll get me out there 2 weeks later or whatever for that show. But no, for the most part, it's not like I sort of cram down and answer questions on like 3 or 4 episodes. No.
Oh, okay. Now they do fly you out. They take care of you, fly you out there, film you, put you up.
Where's it done then? You're talking about flying out. Where is it done? Where's it filmed?
Oh, all the I say most of the filming is done in California, which is where, and the reason why they do that is because Prometheus, who make the show, is based in California. But there was a period where sometimes they would do it here in Dallas, and they would hire like a local film person, editor, sound person, and the producer, and it would be kind of cool, because all I had to do was like drive 20 minutes to some house they'd hired, film me there, and then I'd just drive back home afterwards. I'd leave at 9 in the morning, and I'd be back home at noon.
So like Mark says, they fly you out to California, they put you up in a hotel. You have a nice little break out there.
That's usually what happens. If you got to fly to California, they'll fly you one day, but they can't necessarily get to have you filmed on the same day and fly the same day back. There just isn't time. So what I usually do, they'll fly me. I ask them to fly me in like the afternoon, and then just check in at the hotel, and then the morning after do the filming, and then get me back to the airport, and then I'll get like an evening flight back on the second day. Sometimes I'll cram it. If I can cram it in one day, I'll do that, and I've done that a couple of times where I've flown out like 7 in the morning, got there at 11, filmed from like 12 till 2, get me back to the airport at 5, fly out at 9, get back at 1 in the morning, and just like, but I like it like that. I like to sort of just keep, that's all I kind of know is like go.
Yeah,
what's funny
exciting.
Is the last TV show I was on was about
exciting. I mean, flying to me is just a hassle.
Yeah.
It's I couldn't care less about flying, really.
Well, I tell you what my son done the other week. He flew out to Ireland, to Dublin. He done whatever business he had to do in Dublin. He flew back into Gatwick, straight out to Dusseldorf, done what he had to do out there, and then back home. All in a day.
Oh, jeez.
Well,
that's what it is.
I mean, ideally, I would do it like that every time because, you know, I don't have much patience, really. That's one of my faults. And, you know, when the plane's late or delayed, my fists start to clench and, you know, and the pilot says, oh, one of the lights has come on. We need to get the tech guy in. I'm like... Yeah,
but can't you claim like us over here? If it's delayed over a certain amount of time or whatever, you can put in a claim, can't you, against the airline?
I have no idea about that because I don't book the tickets, you know. So.
Yeah, it's not up to him. So he's not coming out of his pocket.
No. Yeah, unfortunately, it's like, you know, I don't get the, the points that goes to the company.
Well, I was just going to make a quick comment. It's like the last time I was on TV was about 6 or 7 years ago. And with Halloween, they always repeat all the old shows I was on. And the last one I did an episode of Paranormal Survivor. And people call me up and say, hey, Mark, I just saw you on TV. And I groan like, oh, my God, that was 65 pounds ago.
Yeah, he laps it up.
No, it's like I can't stand to see myself on that one because I was so freaking fat when we filmed that episode.
You've never been fat. He's never been fat.
The only big issue I have, and that's why with a lot of shows I don't do their shows, is because, you know, they want me in a shirt, tie, and a jacket, and that's just not me, you know. No. I mean, you know, I'm like a motorbike jacket and black T-shirt, and they're like, well, can't you wear something else? And I'm like, well, you know, if you want... I actually said, you know, to my line that I use to a lot of these shows is that, you know, if you want someone who looks like a lawyer or a school teacher, we'll get a lawyer or a school teacher in. You know, don't try and change me. You know, and that they don't like very often, particularly if it's a new show or one I haven't worked with before, they'll say, you know, can't you remove all your piercings and your earrings and whatever? I said, oh, no. You know, I say, why do you want me to remove them? One of them came up with this stupid angle or excuse where they said, oh, well, you know, that the lights might reflect off them, and which is complete garbage. You know, they just want you to look like some sort of... I'll tell you what they want you to look like a professor, and if you're out doing like a documentary on Bigfoot, they want you to look like Indiana Jones, which I also refuse to dress like that, which is more garbage. You know, I say, I'm not wearing khaki pants, I'm not wearing, you know, a green shirt and a floppy hat, you know. So
you're not doing your Josh Gates impersonation.
Yeah, and just so if you want that, we'll get someone who looks like that normally, you know. I said, I'm not going to, you know, change the way I look because...
No, you don't.
The TV show wants me to, you know.
No, don't, because otherwise it wouldn't have been Nick, would it? You know, well, I'd do it for a laugh. I'd do it for a laugh. I'd go in a tuxedo if I was a bloke, you know, with a bow tie and all that sort of stuff.
But eventually they come round, they realise that, you know, they're not going to get you for the show unless you're prepared to be yourself. And I find it insulting that a TV company who doesn't even know you tries to tell you what to wear, you know.
Yeah.
I won't swear, but that's what it is, you know.
Well, you know what? We've got a few books of yours to talk about tonight, and so I wanted to start off with the newest one that just came out in September, The Alien Book, A Guide to Extraterrestrial Beings on Earth. And so... can you just summarize for us a little bit about this one? I guess it's like almost a catalog of all the different types of aliens that people have encountered.
Yeah, well, the book itself, it's published by Visible Ink Press, and Visible Ink Press, all their books are done the same style. They're all 400 pages long and 150,000 words, and they're done in pretty much like an A to Z style, and you know, so you can kind of dip into it wherever you want to. You know, you don't have to start from page 1 to page 400, thank God. And you don't have to go through the whole thing, from 1 to 400. You can actually, dip into the different sections, P for this or B for that or, V for this and so on. And all the, all it's structured in chapters, but they are all the Visible Ink Press ones are all kind of encyclopedia type books. And the Alien book, the publisher, Roger Janicki at Visible Ink Press, we always have a good debate on what the next books are going to be. And one of the ideas I had was to do a book on aliens and but to look at all the different types that have been described, because I think certainly for the general public, you think of aliens, you think of like little creatures with big heads and big black eyes. That's the image everybody has of
there's
aliens.
other sort of things like viruses and things, isn't there?
Yeah, exactly. So that's why with this book I said to Roger, we could do like 40 or 50 chapters or sections on totally different ones. So that's why there are things like the Chupacabra, the so-called Greys, the reptilians, the Men in Black, flying humanoids, things like that. The list sort of goes on, and each one is kind of very different to the previous one,
Yeah. Isn't there, I read somewhere there's about 200 different species. I don't know how true that is, and I don't know where I read it now, but I read it a long, long time ago that there's about 200 different species. And I know we got a flying hedgehog man at the bottom of the garden. But
Flying hedgehog man?
Yes, I'll tell you about him later.
Okay.
I try and, sort of varied it to where it doesn't get boring, You don't want people to think, well, hang on, this is similar to the chapter before or whatever. You want to be able to break it up for people. So,
but what's good about this? What is good about this is if you hear of a certain one that's not common, not one that you normally would hear about, you're able to go and look that up in the book. That particular one goes straight to that chapter, and if
you've got at the start of the book, you've got different ones, and then there's like about a 20-page bibliography for where all the information's come from, and something like a 15 or 16 page index as well. And so that with Visible Ink Press, they really cover all that kind of stuff really deeply. The bibliography, the index, contacts and sources where you can find further material,
so you can basically find your. Yeah. So you can basically
thank goodness I don't have to do all that. The bibliography and the index. That would drive me insane,
Yeah. But basically you can find your particular alien within no time at all without having to drool all through the books.
Yes, yeah. It's all at the beginning, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I like.
Well, most...
Sorry, Mark. Sorry, I told you we'd talk all over each other. I'm sorry, Mark.
Go ahead.
I was just going to ask if you had anything on invisible aliens.
On invisible aliens, did you say?
Yeah, they're kind of like predator type shimmery things.
Like they're cloaked.
No, I don't have anything like that.
No.
Well,
Okay.
Irene has first-hand experience with that.
Oh, well.
Yeah, don't worry about it.
Oh, you don't want to tell that story?
Shadow people or something like that, you mean?
Yeah, but they're not. They're an outline, just an outline.
Oh, okay. I've got the shadow people in the book, which
Yeah.
I guess might be slightly similar.
I got one of them in the kitchen. It's true. I've been mentioning it on the show for the past 3 or 4 weeks about this shadow person in the kitchen keeps flitting past.
Is that the
Driving
one
me
that
crazy.
keeps stinking up the place?
No, that's a stinky ghost.
No.
I call him my stinky ghost, that one. No, this is, it just flits about in the kitchen. You see it, mainly from the corner of your eye, or when you're watching on something on the telly, you'll see it in the glass door go straight past. But never mind, don't worry about that either. That's just my problem. What was it you wanted to say, Mark?
Well, in going over some of the more traditional aliens that are listed in the book, and I'm looking on Amazon, and it does give some bullet points of different types of aliens that could be, or things that could be considered aliens. And you have your typical Greys, you have your Nordic space brothers, the very human looking ETs. And then of course reptilians and insectoids. Those seem to be like the main four that most people seem to talk about or encounter. But when you were writing this, or even of your previous books, have you ever come across the idea that sometimes how these creatures appear to us is how they want to appear to us? Like they're trying to meet our certain expectations?
Yeah, I think that's actually a good point, because, there are cases where people have seen sort of so-called aliens, sort of almost shapeshift, into different forms. I've actually got some really weird cases where people had seen the Men in Black, not the movie version, Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones, but the genuine Men in Black, which are described as like creepy and pale looking and skinny, and they don't look entirely human. I've actually got a couple of cases where people had said they'd seen the Men in Black kind of shimmer and change into forms of reptilians, which is kind of like really controversial, when you start to get stories like that. But, I think a good case can be made that if these things want to maneuver among us and infiltrate us even, well, the best way to do it is to alter the shape or the form of them so they can, as I said, infiltrate society. I think it sounds like a paranoid aspect, the idea of these things sort of moving among us, and we don't realize what they really are. But I've spoken to so many people who've talked about things like that, the idea of these things taking on a more human form as a means for it to be easier for us to deal with them, when we may actually never have seen their real form.
Well, what's funny is going back to the 80s, it started off as a mini-series, then a series was that show V. And then I remember they tried to resurrect it and redo it a couple of years ago. And the whole idea on that one was aliens who were actually something else pretending to be human-like. Now, it was a little more crude with they were wearing rubber masks over their faces, but it was interesting that back way before these cases started to be reported of these types of shapeshifters, Hollywood kind of introduced it a bit, or maybe that was done on purpose. Who knows? From what you hear sometimes comes out of Hollywood, it's dictated of reptilian type of creatures pretending to be humans.
Yeah, well, I actually remember that show, V. I may be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that I watched it on my last year at school, I think. And
yeah, they were eating guinea pigs and things.
Yeah. Yes.
Oh, that's right. I remember that. The woman who swallowed this giant hamster or something. I remember that.
Yeah, that was the end for me. I didn't bother after that. Mm-hmm.
But the one I did like, it was that movie, I think it was an 80s movie as well, or maybe the early 90s, a movie called They Live.
Yes.
Where you could only see aliens in their real form if you wore these special sunglasses, which I thought was a pretty cool movie. It was almost like a satire on today's society, about sort of a secret elite controlling everybody.
Well, I've talked about that movie many times because it's one of my absolute favorites John Carpenter movies. Right. He made the original Halloween and The Fog, The Thing, but when he did that movie, he was doing it as a satire of the Bush years and the yuppies and the financial differences, class differences with people. But what he really didn't realize when he made that movie, it was really a documentary. And it is more relevant today than it was when it was released. He hit on so many different things in that movie, whether he intended to or not. that it is still a very relevant movie for today.
Well, it is, and I mean, more so in some respects, how we've all become slaves to technology and slaves to the internet, and I mean, not that I'm, complaining about the technology. I mean, it's helped, in many ways massively, but also, there is this angle of people just basically not having any life beyond Facebook or beyond this or that. Sort of kids today, versus when we were kids. I mean, I used to sort of, me and all my friends, we'd go out on our pedal bikes till 9 o'clock at night. Mum and Dad would be like, well, just make sure you're back, by the time the moon's up. And,
you had imagination, didn't you?
Yeah, and now it's just all about sitting in your bedroom and texting. Well, that's, to me, maybe it's because I didn't grow up in the world that we're in now. I grew up in the world before that. But, for me, I don't see much fun in sitting in your bedroom, texting your friends when you could be outside having a good old time, racing around town on your bike and whatever, and falling off and scratching your legs. I mean, that's what kids are supposed to do. They're not supposed to be sort of just carefully looked after in the house in case they fall over and bust a fingernail. You know what I mean?
Well, that could be a topic for a whole nother show, because I can point a finger at that as being one of the primary problems that we're running into especially in this last decade. Because technology is, I mean, I love the internet, being able to do research, do instant communication with people you didn't used to before. There's lots of positives to it, but there are also a lot of negatives to it. And if you're not disciplined, it could easily take control of your life. And sometimes I think that, the quote unquote powers that be like it that way. You keep a pacified human race by keeping them preoccupied with all the little shiny tools and gadgets, and they don't pay attention to what's really going on behind the scenes.
Well, you're right. And the most disturbing thing is that a lot of people just put up with, this, like, surveillance state. They're like, people just, if Facebook's being monitored or Twitter's being monitored or everybody's emails are being monitored, so many people are just like, well, what should I do about it? Or you just have to put up with it. Well, actually you don't. If billions of people, just everybody stood up and said no, things could change overnight, but it requires everybody to stand up for themselves and say...
Well, they won't, will they?
Yeah,
they
we
won't.
want technology. I'm all for the technology, but I'm totally against the way in which the technology is being abused, by people who just want to know what we're talking about in our living rooms, which, brings into...
Well, this happened to me
things
today.
like Alexa and all that kind of stuff. I would not have anything like Alexa in my apartment. I would flat refuse to have that thing in my apartment.
Well, I went onto a Russian website today, and straight away I was being monitored. I knew it straight away. Yeah, I flashed up, all the warnings flashed up.
Yep. Well, it's the disturbing thing for me is not so much the surveillance state, and how much we're being spied on, or all you have to do is all the spyware. You look at one object online, like you're interested, and you look at some item online. Next thing you know, you're getting inundated with ads, pop-up ads from everywhere.
How do they know? This is it. Yeah. How do they know what that you've just been looking at a pair of shoes?
Because they cross-reference all that. They write these algorithms. But then what I also don't like, and again, this is not going to get political. It's just a stating a fact, is how these powers that be that run all this tech company are trying to force certain agendas and shut other people down and stifling free speech. Whether you agree with somebody or not, you should still be allowed to have your opinion. And, you know, a lot of people are getting, even big name people are getting kicked offline, kicked off social media because they have different opinions from the people who run these outlets. So it's really getting scary. You know, they monitor you, and then if they don't like you, they kick you off. Or then it seems like we're almost moving towards what they're doing now in China, that social credit system. God, and that scares the living hell out of me, because if you don't behave the way they want you to behave in China, you know, your social credit score can go down, and then they'll prevent you from flying or traveling or doing all sorts of different things.
Well, but like I said, there's one easy way to stop that, and that is everybody goes against it.
Yep.
You know, I mean, it's not impossible or difficult. It just means everybody has to stand up for their rights. You know, and I mean, you know, when you're talking about things like, you know, you shouldn't say this and you shouldn't say that, you know, it's kind of laughable when I see on the news, you know, people talking about politicians making what they call falsehoods. Well, why don't they call them what they are, which is lies?
Lies.
You know. You know, there's this word that's only really become really popular in the last year or two, falsehoods, you know. They're not falsehoods, they're lies, you know. So, you know, it's one of those situations where, again, it's like, well, we can't say this and you can't use the word lie or liar. You've got to say, you know, the person...
Yeah, it's got to be politically correct.
You know, they're misspeaking, that kind of thing. No. Tell it as it is, you know. If they're scum, tell them they're scum, you know.
Yeah, true. Then they can't have hate speech. Can't put somebody down or hurt their feelings. Oh, good God.
Well, you should be able to. You know, I mean, I often get this where people say to me, you know, or ask for advice, you know, on a book. You know, how can I write a book? You know, and how can I put it together and structure it? And, you know, they'll say, well, can I send you the first couple of chapters? And I say, well, yeah, sure, and I'll tell you what I think. And I do tell them what I think. And if it's a pile of garbage or it reads terrible, I'll tell them, you know. And sometimes they feel crushed. But, I mean, what am I supposed to do? Lie? You know, I'm not going to lie to them. But if what they've written doesn't read well, isn't going to entertain people, isn't informative, or it is in the wrong way, but it's just a big mishmash of stuff, you know, in no coherent fashion, well, of course I'm going to tell them, you know, and if they don't like it, well, you shouldn't have asked for it, you know.
Well, we know that all too well, don't we, Irene, when we were running our publishing company.
Yeah, that sounds like the first version of the Psychic Spy. All the spelling mistakes, all the American spellings and amongst the English spellings.
Yeah.
Oh God!
But some of the
book and went through it.
But also the some of the manuscripts that we received from people that, you know, were even friends, and they sent us the manuscripts, and we looked, and it's like, this is incomprehensible. It's a total mess. One person who I was convinced was dyslexic wrote this one book, and it's like, oh my God. But getting back, let's get. He
did try.
He did try. Yes, and I hear he has another book coming out, so I hope he has a really good editor.
Oh, he got a ghostwriter in the end, didn't he?
Yeah. Yep. Definitely. That helps.
A suggestion.
So let's talk a little bit more about aliens here. So the Alien book and some of the other books that have come out this year, most of them dealing with aliens in one form or another. You know, some of the other creatures that you mentioned here that I've never considered on the extraterrestrial front, at least not traditionally. I mean, you've mentioned Men in Black, which you've written several other books about as well. And I think, I could be wrong, but one of the first mentions of Men in Black was John Keel's book when he mentioned the Mothman prophecies, is when he first talked about the Men in Black, and that phenomenon seemed to take off from there after, you know, everything that was happening in Point Pleasant in the 1960s. And it's still going on today, and it's a very unusual. But, you know, are we dealing with extraterrestrials? Are we dealing? It's so hard to tell what we're dealing with with that situation because they're just so strange.
Well, you're right. And I mean, the reason why we called it the Alien book was because we're dealing with something that is definitively alien in the sense it's not human. But, you can make the angle that alien means extraterrestrial or alien means non-human, and non-human could mean time travelers, creatures from other realms of existence, creatures from different dimensions. But yeah, you mentioned the Men in Black. Most people, even outside of ufology, just about everybody has heard of the Men in Black because of the movies, which are fun, entertaining, but they're very different to reality. In the movies, Tommy Lee Jones and Will Smith characters are basically working for a secret agency within the government. But most witnesses to the Men in Black describe them as being skinny, pale, anemic looking, with these large, bulging eyes that they hide behind wraparound sunglasses. They often wear what are clearly bad wigs to hide the fact that they're completely hairless. And so everything about them is very different to normal people. Now, the first book actually on the Men in Black was published in 1956. It's called They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers, and written by a guy named Gray Barker. And his book told the 1951 story of Albert Bender, who had an encounter with these sort of really weird MIB. And having written several books on the Men in Black, there's no doubt in my mind whatsoever that the phenomenon of the Men in Black is real. But I don't for 1 minute think it has anything to do with the government whatsoever. It's, the real Men in Black are nothing to do with the Pentagon or the White House or the government or nothing. They're something totally different. But Hollywood has kind of not manipulated, because that sounds like it's done deliberately. They just decided to make a movie about alien hunters. There was no agenda. But the real Men in Black are, in my mind, genuine aliens, whether you call them extraterrestrials, time travelers, dimension jumping creatures. I don't know, but they're not from here, put it that way.
They also.
Sorry, Mark.
You go ahead, ladies first.
Thank you. Okay, go on then. No, I'm just joking. So they only turn up when you've witnessed something, though, don't they?
Well, yes.
They don't just turn up and knock your door. You've got to witness something like a UFO or something for them to turn up.
Yeah, for the most part, somebody has an encounter, whether they've seen a UFO up close or an abduction case or a contactee case, and within days afterwards, sometimes hours afterwards, they're sort of visited late at night by these creepy characters who, even today, still wear like old-style black suits, white shirts, skinny black ties, and old-style fedora hats.
Just haven't gone with the fashion, have they?
Sometimes
no, they still look exactly like this. They look like they've dressed. The way they dress, they look like they've stepped out of like a 1950s gangster movie,
Which brings more
but except for the fact that they don't look human, But yeah, the typical scenario is the Men in Black will knock on somebody's door late at night, and if somebody knocks on your door at 11 o'clock at night, and you look through the little spy hole on the door, and you see these three creepy guys in black suits, you're probably not going to open the door to them, But the weird thing is, most people who claim to have had these experiences do open the door to them. It's almost as if they've been mind-controlled or hypnotized into allowing them in. And that's one of the weird things which kind of ties in with the old vampire stories, where the Men in Black actually won't come into your home until you invite them in. But the invitation that you make is almost like a mind control. You don't want to let them in, but somehow you feel that you have to let them in. And typically people are warned not to talk about their experiences. And certainly the most disturbing aspect is that very often, literally like the day after a lot of the witnesses fall sick and ill, as if they've had almost like a supernatural infection, if you like. That there's something about them that affects us if we get too close to them.
Almost like a radiation poisoning or something.
Yeah, people talk about falling sick and weak and getting fevers and actually in some cases, really rare illnesses and diseases, where somebody like, 1 in a million gets it,
Another type of alien that is very similar, or kind of rides on the piggyback on that, would be the black-eyed children epidemic.
Yeah.
And I remember when first hearing about this, about 10 years ago, I think is when it first started to really come out and be reported, at least more widespread. With these kids, anywhere from preteens to teenage kids with black eyes, anemic looking, and they show up on your front doorstep, or they walk up to your car, and they always have an excuse to get inside, either inside your house or your car. And there's just something just really wrong. But they also have that hypnotic effect too. People, they're instantly afraid of them, but yet they almost follow the commands to let them in.
Yeah, you're right. And actually, I point out that in the book, there's about a 14 to 15-page chapter on the black-eyed children in the book. And there's no doubt that there are similarities between the black-eyed children and the Men in Black. The black-eyed children, well, they're called black-eyed children because their eyes are solid black, the entire eye. But whereas the Men in Black, wear the black suits and the fedoras, the black-eyed children wear black hoodies. Both groups have pale skin and kind of like plastic-like skin, where one of the witnesses described it as if the entity had sort of overdone it with the Botox. They didn't look like normal people. They looked like kind of, Hollywood actors who've gone too far. And so that's basically the way they look. But also there's this angle of having to be invited into the home. And typically the black-eyed children will come out with lines like, we're lost, can we come in and use the phone? Or we're homeless, can we come in and have food? But it all revolves around trying to find a way into the house. Now, on those rare occasions that people have said the black-eyed children did manage to get into the house, the witnesses said that almost instantly they started to feel ill and weak, and as if they were being drained of energy. And one witness described it as if like a diabetic who had missed breakfast and lunch, and then by 9 o'clock at night they start to crash. They get their shakes and they're weak and tired, and they start to hyperventilate and get into a panic state because their blood sugar is just plummeting, and they just don't feel well. And that's how witnesses have described the sort of interactions with the black-eyed children, is that it's almost like they're like a psychic vampire, rather than Christopher Lee running around with a cloak and Peter Cushing chasing him with a stake or whatever.
Well, and there's also other phenomenon that may or may not be related to it. There's you hear of cattle mutilations, but then they find human mutilations, much more rare, but it happens. Could be these black-eyed kids or other similar beings who talk their way in, and for whatever reason, it's like the old vampire stories. Like, they can't just come in your house; they have to be invited.
Yeah.
Yeah, the only difference really is that it's kind of been upgraded from the 21st century. You go back and read, sort of early sort of 18th century, 19th century novels on vampires, Bram Stoker, that kind of thing. There isn't much difference really with the black-eyed kids today, except it has been, as I said, upgraded and revamped for the 21st century. What I will say, and I didn't talk about this too much in the book because I was sort of limited by page count and everything else, but I can tell you for sure that a lot of people who have had these encounters with the black-eyed children, when you actually speak to them and you get close to them, sometimes they will share with you something that they hadn't previously shared, and that is that some of them had been actually involved in occult activity. They were, attached to occult groups and sort of witchcraft groups and things like this, as if they maybe, the fact that they were tied to these groups may have sort of opened a portal or a doorway that allowed something to come in, because they were they had pre-existing involvement in the world of the occult. And that's kind of like the same as Albert Bender, the guy who really kicked off the Men in Black mystery in the early 50s. Albert Bender was the guy, his book, Flying Saucers and the Three Men, tells the story of the first real MIB case in 1951. But by Bender's admission, he was heavily involved in the occult and the supernatural, and he performed all sorts of complicated rituals to try and summon up supernatural entities. And so I think some of these encounters, particularly things like the black-eyed children, they may be extraterrestrial, but there may be a strange and odd way of being able to invoke them as well.
What's odd is how in those cases where the black-eyed children need an invitation to come into your house, yet other people who are abduction experiencers who go through the abduction process, where they'll wake up and their bed is either surrounded by ETs, or they see the ETs coming out of closets or through the walls, whether they're invited or not, they're able to come into the house and take you. And everybody from even Whitley Strieber, when his book Communion came out, he talked about his first encounter that he could remember that happened to him back in 1985, that they just came for him. And so there's the difference between these types of creatures or entities, and some need permission and some can do whatever they want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, what this demonstrates more than any other is that when we talk about aliens, these things are really alien to the point of where it's difficult to even understand what they are or what their agenda is, which, it's not sort of simplistic as like, aliens invade the earth in like a Hollywood movie, where it's sort of black and white, you can, and you can see the story and sit back and watch it, and there's no complicated things, it's just a bit of fun. But when you look into these real cases, the whole scenario is just so weird and strange and falls into categories that you really begin to wonder what you've got yourself into. Are we dealing with extraterrestrials? I think in some cases we are, but they seem to be extraterrestrials that also employ the world of the supernatural and the occult as well. It's somehow as if they are able to manipulate the supernatural world and the occult world as a part of their activities.
I just started reading Whitley Strieber's brand new book that just came out. What's the title of it here? It's called A New World. And in it, he's talking about, and he's mentioned it in some of his other books. And I mention Whitley a lot, too, because I've been following Whitley's case. And, we've talked to him a couple of times here on the show. And I think he hits on a lot of things that are, I think, is really uncovering a lot of the truth behind the extraterrestrial phenomenon. And that is that the supernatural is much more involved in it. I mean, you have a lot of people from MUFON who feel that aliens are nothing more than, from another world and nuts and bolts spacecraft, and it's that simple, where it seems like I've been leaning towards over the years that we're dealing much more with an interdimensional types of creatures. They're not coming here from other planets, but other planes of existences, and that there's a lot of things that we consider supernatural, like even dealing with the dead or spirits, that seem to be intertwined with it. A lot of people who've had abduction experiences report seeing, dead relatives or people that they knew.
Mark, wasn't it Barry Taft that wrote a book, UFOs Above, Aliens Below? I mean, Aliens Above, Ghosts Below?
It's similar to that. Yeah, Dr. Barry Taft wrote that one, Aliens Above, Ghosts Below.
Yeah, he put the connection together as well, didn't he?
Well, I think he was looking at two different phenomenon, but, slightly, it wasn't as incorporated as I've read in some other cases from some other authors. And of course, I can only read. I don't have my own experiences. It's like I can only go off of people like you, Nick, and what you all write and report and trying to sort through it. But it does seem like the phenomenon in itself is far more strange than the general public is aware.
Yeah, because many of the I told you I was depopulated today. Many of the investigations that we've done in the past and one thing or another, when people are having paranormal activity in their home and you get deeper into it, they're also having UFO and activity outside the house.
Or it's something that maybe even mimics what you think is UFO or alien activity. I mean, I had the one case I worked on here in New Jersey where it seemed like a classic haunting case until we realized it was something attached to the land and it was something inhuman, not demonic or anything, but inhuman. And the client one day she wrote me, she goes, "Mark, you're not going to believe what I saw in my bedroom last night." And I go, "What?" And she was afraid to tell me. She thought I'd literally think she was crazy. And when I finally said, "No, go ahead, you could trust me," what was it? She goes, "It was a frickin' alien. This thing turned around. It was this tall white thing and turned around and looked exactly like a tall gray alien." But yet what she had been encountering in her house for over 10 years didn't really have anything to do with the UFO or alien phenomenon. So there is this kind of like overlap of different types of phenomenon. So that was a pretty strange thing. It just shows how, and we're recording again. It just shows how sometimes different types of phenomenon seem to overlap.
Well, for me, this demonstrates something that I've when I first got involved in ufology, I could just sort of backtrack. When I was sort of a kid, sort of 12, 13, everything was kind of black and white. Bigfoot was just a giant ape. Aliens were coming from this star or that star, in metal ships and so on and so on. But certainly by the time I was in my sort of mid-20s, I'd sort of very much come more around to the idea of a lot of John Keel's stuff, that namely that all this kind of phenomena was interconnected. And when you talk about this particular case, of somebody having a paranormal experience, and then having a UFO encounter or an alien encounter, and the person has had no direct involvement with aliens, again, that to me is a perfect example of how the angle of aliens ties in with the occult, with the paranormal and the supernatural. And the problem is, so many people in ufology self-censor themselves and try and censor other people who just kind of want that 1950s era of, something similar to like the day the Earth stood still, or,
Nick, speaking of like nuts and bolts craft, there's your other book, Area 51, Revealing Truth of UFOs, Secret Aircraft, Cover-Ups, and Conspiracies. And, that fits right in with Area 51. Supposedly it has had this reputation thanks to Bob Lazar when he came out in the 80s with George Knapp in his exposés, of revealing that supposedly they were reverse engineering UFOs at Area 51. And it's over the years, it's really become this phenomenon. What started off as a little niche conspiracy theory is now, thanks to the Storm Area 51 movement earlier this year, has just really exploded in public consciousness.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, Area 51 has become one of these sort of aspects of ufology which goes outside of ufology. Like we mentioned earlier, everybody's heard of the Men in Black, even if you've got no interest in UFOs at all. And just about everybody's heard of Area 51 in the same situation as if you've got no interest in UFOs at all. You know what Area 51 is. It's a secret place out in the desert. Most people would reply along those lines. So it sort of jumped from just being an aspect of ufology to become a part of sort of pop culture almost, and so in that sense, the whole aspect of Area 51 is fascinating because arguably there's no military base in the US or possibly even in the world that operates in the same way that Area 51 does. I mean, you cannot get within about 15 miles of it, of the actual base itself. There's certain portions of the land in the area which were actually handed over to the Air Force, not under entirely legal circumstances back in the 1980s. And, on top of that, you've got all the classified work that we know that went on there and still does, sort of testing radical and new aircraft of sort of really weird designs. And then, of course, you've got Area 51 for what it's known for to just about everybody, the UFO connection. So, it's easy to understand why it's become sort of legendary, like I said, not just in ufology, but in the world itself, because of these, regardless of whether there are aliens there or crashed UFOs or whatever, the fact is, as I said, the base itself operates under extraordinary security, and you have to wonder, well, why is there this, such security? Why isn't it going on at other places? Why does this Area 51 have to be way out in the desert to where literally no one can get to it? So, it's become, a piece of intrigue, huge intrigue to a lot of people. And as you said, it all kind of kicked off with Bob Lazar. But of course, the big question is, are there aliens there? Are the crashed UFOs there? Or are we looking at something else that is being sort of hidden behind, a UFO banner, if you like?
The security there is absolutely red hot, isn't it? They've even got ground sensors, listening devices for any intrusion whatsoever anywhere near the property, besides security guards, and they will kill you.
Well, they have... Go ahead, Nick.
Well, they haven't killed anybody yet, but they do have the right to do that. Somebody refuses to stop, and charges across the landscape. I mean, chances are that would never actually happen if it's just one or two people doing that. I think what they would do, they would just realise that probably people within the UFO field, and they just round them up, fine them, put them in jail for 30 days, so...
Yeah.
But I don't think it would ever come to the issue of, somebody literally being shot dead because they wouldn't stop. There's plenty of easier and other ways to ensure, somebody can just be detained and, taught a lesson for the 30 days or whatever.
But many of these security places, they don't have, ground sensors. To put in
right.
things like ground sensors, picking up any vibration whatsoever.
Well, the main reason why they have the ground sensors is because a lot of people don't realise it's not like there's a huge fence, circling the base. You can literally walk to Area 51. A lot of people don't realise that. But
it's about 10 miles long, isn't it?
What's that?
The actual place itself is about 10 miles in length, isn't it?
Yes, and and it's about 15 miles from where legally you can walk towards it. When you reach one particular point, which is like 15 miles before you reach the base, that's as far as legally you can go. And if you try and go further, you'll have the security guards, come down on you. Now, to get back to your question about, the ground sensors, they're there purely and simply because you can keep walking. And so they have the ground sensors to make sure that nobody gets too far, and that, they've got the sensors will pick up, if it's midnight, in just pitch black darkness, and, they'll still be able to pick it up if you're sort of crawling across the desert floor like a lizard or something. They'll still pick you up,
Yeah. Yeah, there must be. I tell you what, they must be jumping in and out of their trucks all the time, because wild animals walking across there and one thing or another,
Well, actually,
some of them wild animals are heavier than a human, aren't they?
Well, they've got the equipment that they use out there to sort of determine, what's walking around there. The sensors are designed to pick up animals and people of different weights. So, in other words, they don't just pick up the movements of an animal or of a person. They can actually also judge the weight of the animal. So, if it's like 12 or 13 stone, 140, 150 pounds, something like that, they can pretty much say with a great deal of accuracy that what they've just picked up is a person. And if the sensors are picking up something that weighs, 20 pounds, it could be like a raccoon or something like that. So they can even get it down to that. They don't have to come running out just because, a rat or a possum or whatever raced across the desert. So they'll know exactly what it was and what it wasn't. So.
Yeah, they don't have any wildcats in the area then, in Nevada.
Many what?
Wildcats.
Well, they have mountain lions.
Mountain lions, but they must weigh more than me.
Yeah. But even so, they're not going to be anywhere near the weight of a person, really.
Well, there could be that they've got ground sensors and they've got height sensors as well. So when the ground sensor picks up on something intruding, the actual height sensor kicks in at the same time and can tell whether it's a mountain lion or whatever.
Yeah.
Or by the
so
height
of
the person.
Security, in other words. The security goes all over the place, and, for example, the Russians have spy satellites that actually circle over the US and take pictures of Area 51. And they know, the US, the people who work there know exactly what times the Russians come over. So anything sensitive that's on the runways or whatever, they just reel them into the hangar, and then, when the satellites have gone by, they bring them out again. So, everything is sort of majorly secret.
Yeah. Well, I can imagine that. I've just had a vision of them wheeling in all this sensitive aircraft and one thing or another into the hangars and pushing out the old paddling pool, the swimming pool. So people will be having a barbecue and one thing or another every time the Russian satellite goes over.
Well, I grew up in
I think they've probably got past all that now, because the Russians know what they're sort of pretty much looking for, new technologies, and America knows what the Russians are looking for. So, it's just a case of making sure it gets hidden, and so that, when these Russian spy satellites fly, sort of orbit over at like 300 miles up or whatever, hopefully they're not going to pick up too much, really. So.
Yeah, and they call it Operation Dreamland, don't they?
Well, Dreamland is just one of its several nicknames that have been given to it over the years by people who work there. But whether that means anything or not, it's just a cool name.
But they're also, from what I understand, it's not just Area 51. There's many areas like this, not only in America, but all around the world.
Well,
same sort of things. Maybe not so well known as Area 51.
Yeah. Well, the Area 51 itself, it's called Area 51 because it's one specific area on what's called the Nevada Test and Training Range. And the NTTR is a gigantic area of land which is run by Edwards Air Force Base. And Area 51 falls within the perimeters of the training range. So it's not like it's just a desert in Area 51. Area 51 is within the training range. It's not like the
Like,
Area 51 is the main place.
Yeah, so it's like the whole of the Nevada desert or wherever. It's sectioned off. Like you've got Area 52, B, things like that.
Well,
In
yeah,
Section
I don't know if
B,
it's
Section...
literally Area 52, but I mean, there are different areas with different names, and some of it's done for aircraft testing and, a bunch of other work. But it all falls, as I said, under the Nevada Test and Training Range, and that's the overall area. And then you've got all these smaller little and some quite big places as well, like Area 51, all contained within the training range.
Well, I was saying I grew up in Los Angeles, so I was only about an hour away from Edwards Air Force Base. And
Really?
yeah, in fact, I was there at Edwards Air Force Base in person for the first space shuttle landing. When the Columbia came down, we were in high school. My brother and a couple of friends, we went out there. We actually camped overnight, which was a lot of fun. They had a big perimeter set up for everybody. When we were there, got there, hardly anybody was there. The next morning, there was 250,000 people there. And that was something to see, I'll tell you that. Not knowing, being it was the first time it was coming in from space, you didn't know if it was going to make it or not. And then when you heard that double sonic boom, and
That's history.
It's history. I'm proud to say that I was there that day. That was really, really cool. But the thing is, with that, growing up, we always heard sonic booms.
So did we. Even here in the country in Sussex.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because they're always testing.
Yeah.
They're always testing aircraft out there at Edwards. I mean, that's where Chuck Yeager broke the sound barrier. They test a lot of experimental aircraft, but I guess because it's so close to L.A. and so wide open, where Area 51 at least has natural protection by, the mountain ranges around it. Of course, it didn't in the beginning. A lot of people were getting up on nearby mountains and looking down on the base, but they've since taken care of that, buying up all the land or pretty much forcing people to sell their land, whether they wanted to or not.
Yeah, and I mean, that's why, the whole story's been quite controversial, because you have these land grabs and people, being offered huge amounts, to move to different parts. And you have to wonder, why isn't that happening in different parts of the country? Why is it really just around Area 51? And I think those are the kind of questions that make people think, well, what is going on there?
Yeah. I mean, again, we mentioned Bob Lazar earlier, coming out in the 80s, and there's the new documentary that came out, Bob Lazar, Area 51 and Flying Saucers. Jeremy Kenyon made that documentary. Did you ever get a chance to see that yourself?
Yes, I have, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, generally it seems like Lazar's, a lot of people, they've tried to, discredit him as well, like they do most people who come out, but he generally seems to seem at least credible to me, not like I'm any expert or anything, but, how when they were shooting the documentary, how even he got raided by the FBI, so they're still harassing him after all this time.
Well, yeah, but I mean, if you look carefully at his story as it is today, when he got raided by the FBI, that was actually nothing to do with aliens. That was to do with another portion of the job that he has now, the company that he has now. But as far as Lazar's concerned, really you've got people just in two camps. You've got the people who believe the story, and there are people who disbelieve his story. And, for example, Stan Friedman, the late Stan Friedman, he, was one of the biggest proponents of alien activity on our planet. But he said of Lazar's story, and I'm quoting Stan directly here, he said it's bunk, bunk, bunk. And he said it 3 times like that. And then you have people who say, that Stan was wrong, and that they really do have crashed and recovered UFOs at Area 51, and aliens, whether dead or alive, But my personal view is that I don't believe that Lazar did see anything extraterrestrial at Area 51. I don't believe that at all. But I don't believe he was a hoaxer. And I'll explain what I mean by that. Lazar does not come across like someone who fabricated the story, and I don't think he did, because, particularly, when it comes to the issue of hoaxing in ufology, unfortunately, I've come across over the years, a few of these sort of crazy people who just make stuff up. Now, what they do, they might sort of write a book and it sells well, and then they go on the lecture circuit, and they're sort of doing 30, 40, 50 conferences a year, then they get on TV shows, and then they put out another book, and so on and so on. And they, and if the story dries up, then they suddenly come up with some new material to add to the story. Now, Lazar never, for example, he's got his own book out, and there's the documentary, which is creating a lot of controversy and also a lot of discussion. However, Lazar came out with his story in 88, 89. Now, between 89 and roughly now, he hardly did anything. He didn't try and capitalize on the story at all. He would tell the story to anyone who wanted to know it. But back then, through the 80s, the 90s, 2000s, and right up to pretty much the last year or two, he never wrote a book, didn't have a movie out about him. He didn't really do much on the lecture circuit, and certainly not on the conference circuit. So you have to wonder, what was his agenda in terms of telling the story when he actually secured pretty much nothing from telling the story? It wasn't like, he was, I can tell you that the number of lectures and conferences he did was minuscule. He never wrote a book, until just recently. He could have done all this in that previous 30 years. So, in other words, he doesn't come across like a typical hoaxer. He doesn't. But again, as I said, I don't believe he saw aliens or extraterrestrial craft. What I think is that he was deliberately lured into a program which was possibly designed using like psychological warfare and disinformation to seed rumors to the Russians that the US has alien technology.
I was just going to say that. That's what's happening.
And so I think that... What's that? What was that?
Irene was agreeing with you. She was just going to say that.
Oh.
Yeah, I was just going to say this is obviously disinformation. That he's been putting out.
But I don't think Lazar was a willing participant in spread disinformation. What I think is that he was kind of used as like like a patsy kind of thing.
Manipulated. Yeah.
What's that?
Manipulated.
Yeah.
Manipulated. Can you not hear me?
What's that? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh.
It's just so you're not speaking the Queen's English there, Irene.
I'm speaking his English.
So I think basically that what it was, from my perspective, I think he was used as like the fall guy, and I think they probably did a big, lengthy profile on his background and probably concluded that if they got him out at Area 51, showed him all these alleged top secret documents on UFOs and aliens, and if they took it even further and showed him some mocked up craft, then he almost certainly, possibly, from their perspective, would be that he'd start talking about it, which is exactly what he did. Now, at that same time, it's important to note that US intelligence was worried that Russian spies were actually spying on Area 51 and trying to figure out what was going on out there. So if you create a story to the effect that there are aliens and UFOs out there, that is probably going to push those Russian spies to dig even further. So it's kind of like like the fish and the reel. You reel the fish in. In this case, you reel in the Russian spies by giving them a really juicy story. And I think that's what it was. I don't think it had anything to do with aliens or extraterrestrial craft. I think it was an operation, psychological warfare, disinformation, counterintelligence, designed to make people think there was alien technology out there, and that Lazar knew about it. But I think at the end of the day, it was a scheme designed to essentially reel in Soviet spies who they knew were already in Nevada and trying to figure out what was going on.
Sorry, Mark. I was just going to say, but this happened both ways, didn't it? Because this was a Cold War then. So, disinformation about paranormal subjects and UFOs was flying back and forth from Russia to America, America to Russia.
Well, the other thing I was going to mention is the fact that, what do you think about, even though what Lazar may have been part of a disinformation campaign, not to his knowledge, of course, but he was used. But he also knew of when certain test flights were going up, and he was taking people out into the desert, and they were actually watching these craft come up at the times that he said they would, and they're performing these maneuvers that's very much like UFOs, and quite unlike any aircraft that we know we have today. I mean, do you think it's possible that maybe they didn't have actual flying saucers out there, but maybe they had reverse engineered some type of technology from the past or from other locations, and they were using it to test it out there?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think that's entirely plausible. The fact that, or the theory that they really do have fantastic craft out there that can perform all sorts of weird maneuvers, that would not surprise me at all. Because, I mean, if you think about it, for example, the stealth bomber and the stealth fighter, they were not sort of revealed until the latter part of the 1980s. But the original tests and technology developed, or on the
10 years earlier.
What's that?
The original test was quite a few years earlier, wasn't it? About 10 years or something.
What's that?
Carry on.
It's the delay.
There's a delay between, because you're on the telephone, I'm on Skype. There's this delay.
Oh, okay.
This is what I was afraid was going to happen. I was saying that the actual tests were done earlier by about 10 years or so on these.
Yeah, the test actually went back to like 1975, 76. So, in other words, it wouldn't surprise me that when Lazar was out at this place called S4, like a subgroup of Area 51, it wouldn't surprise me if in '89 they were testing stuff that, we still haven't been told about. And now, of course, we're almost in 2020 now. That makes me think that probably there are things way, way ahead of what they got in 1988, 89. So I think Lazar was not a hoaxer. He wasn't a prankster. He wasn't a knowing or a witting player in a disinformation program. But I think he was carefully sort of focused on by the people who wanted to, have somebody like him be the stooge. And because he did have a background in physics, and he did work on some sensitive projects in the early 1980s, so I think he was seen, as somebody they could use, and who also had a controversial background which they could use potentially to knock him down. So everything to me kind of smacks of like a staged event, if you like, or series of events. But the problem is, so many people in ufology found all this to be so exciting that they basically, the sort of the common sense factor went out the window, and people just were excited to hear stories about UFOs at Area 51 without actually giving much thought to the idea, well, why did they pick Lazar? Why was he the guy? The problem is so many people in ufology just want to hear exciting stories, and sometimes they don't even care if there are facts to it or not.
Yeah, that's true. Very true.
Well, it's one of the things with 51, it has its own mystique with its own airline, blacked out windows, taking people to and from the base, and supposedly there's a big underground aspect of it as well. And I know we've talked about underground dumb bases, deep underground bases all across the U.S. And supposedly there's one underneath Area 51, like, there's one under Dulce and in the Washington, D.C. area, where they're supposedly doing a lot of different secret work. But with the public these days, it seems like the public that used to trust the government now has so much distrust for a government that, it seems like we're pushing back at all the secrecy, regardless, no matter what it is. And, we've had people like Richard Dolan and Stanton Friedman, as you mentioned, Linda Moulton Howe, all pushing for disclosure for many years now to get the government to admit to the whole UFO phenomena, which I don't think will ever happen, at least not, in a direct way. I think they'll always, because they've been lying for so long, they don't know how to tell the truth, and they're so afraid of what it's going to do to mainstream society that
I think all governments, though, have got to be in agreement to disclose the truth. It's no use America just disclosing the truth.
But see, that's the thing, is a lot of
Russia, England, everywhere.
A lot of other countries have. What I was saying, Irene, is a lot of other countries have disclosed the UFOs. Not everything from the UK's released a lot of different files. Yeah,
but so is America. These these sort of files, there's not actually coming out and saying, okay, we own up, they are here.
Right.
Nobody's done that yet.
No, but I believe there are more countries than the U.S. that are willing to share their UFO reports and documentation than the U.S. Everyone from Canada to Australia to the U.K. and France. It's the U.S. that just seems to really clamp up its sphincter, so to speak, and just doesn't want to admit anything or let anything out. Although, what is interesting is the Navy airplane camera footage that has come out in the last in the last year or two. I believe it was, which aircraft carrier was it? Oh God, the Ancient Aliens, I think, did an episode on it. That camera footage that they admitted, yeah, we've got something here, but there seems to be a lot of internal hand wringing over it. Do you know which footage I'm talking about, Nick?
Yeah, I do. And I think, it's interesting that this footage has surfaced. But I think, the fact that we were told about this footage and that we were also told back in December 2017 about this secret UFO program, which has really been overblown a little bit. I mean, if you look at it, it's not like some sort of super secret program. The funding for it was very small. And, it's not like they're talking about having dead aliens and crashed UFOs hidden away. This was a relatively small think tank type group. But, in terms of disclosure and things like this, I'm quite skeptical of the idea of getting disclosure. One of the primary reasons why, it could come one day, but one of the primary reasons why I've sort of washed my hands of disclosure or the possibility of disclosure is because certain players in the UFO field, and specifically certain people in the disclosure movement, I got sick and tired of them basically saying things like this. I've got an insider source in the Pentagon who says disclosures coming in September 2014. When that comes round, I've been told by Brigadier or General so-and-so that it's going to be put forward to 2016. And it's kind of like the story like the boy who cried wolf, and he cried wolf so many times. In the end, nobody came calling or running to help him. And it's kind of like that. The amount of times I've seen people in ufology who stood on stages and said, I've been told disclosures coming on this month or this year. If I had $1 for every one of them, I wouldn't quite be a millionaire, but you get the point, what I'm saying. And so I bet my view is that if you're in the disclosure movement, if you've got a certain date, a specific date, and you're 99% sure that this is accurate, say so. But don't keep coming, standing on the stage at conference after conference saying it's coming, when it never does. My view is shut up until you've got something fully 100% concrete,
Well,
I agree with you there.
That's actually like, on the internet when you get these people saying the end of the world is going to be next Tuesday at 2 p.m. And then the end of the world doesn't come. Oh, no, it's been updated. Now it's going to be, in September and this date. And, it never comes and life goes on. And
But I think one of the things that a lot of people forget also, when people say the U.S. government won't release this or that, I don't actually think it's the government itself. I think whoever's sitting on the really deep, solid material, evidence, and data, the big irony of it might be that they don't know how to reveal it. It's not like they're like some villain in, like an old black and white silent movie, with like a mustache and a cloak, They're normal people like us, They've got kids and they watch TV shows just like we do. They're not monsters, They're not sinister people. They're normal people who are tasked with dealing with an extremely disturbing and awkward subject. And I think they're not hiding this for reasons, where they're all rubbing their hands together because there's this big conspiracy. I think a lot of the silence and the reluctance not to say anything is because they may actually not have the answers at all. They may know that there are UFOs, that aliens have visited us, but that doesn't mean they've got the answers as to where these things are from, what they are, what their agenda is. Now, if you're the president or the prime minister or whatever, and you say, well, yes, okay, we're going to come clean, but we don't know what these things are, we don't know where they're from, we don't know what they want, we're unable to stop them doing what they want to do, it would be very difficult for any government to say that.
It would be panic, wouldn't it? It would be literally panic.
I don't know if it would be panic. I don't know if it would be panic.
It's like saying the world's coming to an end in an hour,
Well, no, but they wouldn't say the world's going to end in an hour. I mean, the way I look at it is that the governments or certain governments won't disclose, not because they don't want to, but because they don't know how to tell the story when they even don't have the full story. We assume that government agencies, because they're hiding it, we assume they've got all the answers. They might not have any answers. They might just have 10 or 15 sort of mouldy, decaying bodies in tanks, in some cryogenic tank, and they might have 2 or 3 crashed UFOs, who knows? But that doesn't tell you anything about what they are, what their agenda is, what they're up to. And I think a lot of it's due to the ignorance, the lack of knowledge that causes a lot of the people in government not to want to disclose, because they don't know how to tell a story, but even they don't know what the true story is.
Yeah. Okay, so your latest book, was it UFOs and KGB?
Well, actually, the Alien book is the newest one, but then we also have Flying Saucers from the Kremlin. Yeah. And, of course, Irene has a specific interest in Russians and Soviet spies and whatnot.
Yes, especially when they've done what they done last night.
Oh, yeah, after you did a search and they started attacking your computer?
Yeah, bloody hell. Yeah, never mind that. Anyway. Come on. Let's go and talk about the UFOs and the Kremlin. Have disinformation and as well. Like I said, have you heard of Skinny Bob?
What's that?
Skinny Bob? Have you heard of Skinny Bob?
Skinny Bob?
Skinny Bob.
Skinny Bob. Yeah.
What is it?
Well, apparently, if you go onto YouTube, and there is a site on YouTube, Ivan0135, he's put out 4 of 7 videos, and one of them is of an alien called Skinny. That's
I've
Skinny
seen that
Bob.
video. It looks like it was taken back in like the 50s, this black and white of this really big-headed alien pushing some buttons.
Yeah. I was wondering if you'd heard of that. No, it's not pushing buttons. It's kind of blinking and everything, and one thing or another. But it's all to do with the way he's put these out. It's all to do with disinformation, as if it's coming out of Russia. And he says that over time, he's been putting them, he's got 4 out. He's been putting them out for the last 8 years. And apparently there's going to be 7 of them altogether. One's of a UFO, one's of this alien-type creature, and I haven't really looked at the others, but it's mainly writing that's coming up on the actual film about disinformation or whatever. It strikes me as disinformation being put out by somebody that's purporting to be something to do with the Russia.
Well, yeah. I mean, disinformation, is the perfect way to hide a truth by putting out a lie that looks really true.
That's right.
That's how so many agencies around the world, do that. Purely either to sort of reel in somebody from the other side or to push people down one avenue when they actually should be going down the other avenue.
Yeah, and it can work the other way. Sometimes they put out the truth, and it's so good that the other people, the other intelligence, it can never be true, can't be true, don't take no notice of that. And they can carry on, because they've actually told the truth, but it's so unbelievable or, to the other side, that they take no notice.
Well, yeah, and sometimes, sometimes you just get sort of bizarre aspects. I mean, I remember back in the late 1980s when there was, some behind the shadows sort of deep throat kind of sources who said the aliens like strawberry ice cream. I thought that was hilarious. But then I remember, sort of back in the mid-90s, people were talking about that. Well, maybe they really do eat strawberry ice cream. And I'm like, well, do you really believe they eat strawberry-flavoured ice cream and they actually don't like peach-flavoured or chocolate? It always has to be strawberry, And people were just spending so much time on this, which was basically just a rumour put out by someone who we never knew and whose face was hidden behind, like a curtain. So, and yet people bought into it, It was funny. I found it really entertaining, but I thought it was it was just ridiculous.
So the only way to find that one out, people, is to go and grab yourself an alien, get yourself a carton of Wall's ice cream, strawberry flavoured, and feed it. That's imagine.
I mean, admittedly, strawberry ice cream does taste good, so maybe the aliens really do like it. But I mean, on the other hand, from my perspective, all of this is put out with an agenda at work, and people, I've seen it so many times where an alleged whistleblower comes forward, and it's all over the net. What people should do is my view is that if you get a whistleblower or an insider come to you and they've got a sensational story about UFOs, you should not say anything or do anything other than carefully and quietly research the story for yourself to the point where you're sure you've got just about the full story, and either you think it's either true or it's garbage. But the problem is, ufology doesn't operate like that. Ufologists, so many of them, when they get an insider or whistleblower, they put it all out on the net to start with, which contaminates the stories. What they should do is stay quiet until, like I said, they're sure they've got an answer, but they don't. They just run around like headless chickens and put it on their blog or the website. I've spoken to Colonel so-and-so, and this is his story. Well, there might not even be a Colonel so-and-so, but you just blabbed it across the net and shared more useless disinformation.
Well, well, it's like what you're, reading the synopsis of the Russian book, and I have to admit I haven't had a chance to read that one yet. How the Russians were using all sorts of information to meddle with the U.S. and try to stir us up, try to provide disinformation, and maybe they're still doing it today by some of these so-called
everyone's
whistleblowers.
Doing it today. Yeah,
well, I'll give you a perfect example of this. I got hold of George Adamski's FBI file, which back in the late 80s, when it started to surface, portions of his surveillance file came out. There was about 70, 80 pages. George Adamski's surveillance file, put together by the FBI, is now running at just over 400 pages. That shows to what extent he was being watched. And one of the main reasons why Adamski was watched by the FBI was because in the early 50s, in some of his early lectures and conferences, Adamski would actually say, the long-haired space brothers, that everybody's heard of, Adamski would stand up on stage and say that his space brother alien friends had a government which was very similar to Soviet communism. In other words, he was spreading the word, Adamski was spreading the word that the aliens were communists. Now, if this was just somebody, sort of speaking to 4 or 5 people in a library on a Sunday afternoon, 5 people and somebody's pet dog, nobody would have cared. But Adamski's first book, Flying Saucers Have Landed, sold more than 100,000 copies. You don't get figures like that even today, really, in ufology. And the FBI was very concerned that the Russians had turned him away from just talking about aliens, but to use the UFO subject as a ways and means to spread communism, but to do it under a UFO banner. And the FBI was deeply concerned that the Russians had approached Adamski and were using him as a means to say, well, communism isn't so bad after all. So, and there's a lot of things like that in the book where clearly the Russians approached certain people in ufology to perform sort of dirty tricks for them, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Those interfering Ruskies.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, what is the connection with the KGB and the Majestic 12 documents?
Yeah. Well, I've got an entire chapter on this in the book. For example, the FBI and the Defense Intelligence Agency in the US came to sort of a tentative conclusion that the MJ-12 documents had been fabricated by the KGB. And for people who don't know, the MJ-12 documents are these purport to talk about this secret group in the US government, MJ-12 or Majestic 12.
Yeah, to do with President Harry Truman, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. And basically, Majestic 12 supposedly oversees the Roswell wreckage and the bodies and that kind of stuff. Now, the FBI and as I said, the FBI and the Defense Intelligence Agency did not believe these documents when they were leaked were real, and they didn't believe they were hoax documents either by some guy, in his basement or whatever. What they actually did believe was that the Russians had created them, and there was a good reason for that. We know for sure, because the documents have been released now, that there are a number of people in the 1980s, just before the document surfaced, there were a number of people in U.S. intelligence and in the U.S. defense industry who also had deep interests in UFOs. And the Russians wanted to find out what those people in the U.S. knew and what programs they were working on. And so the FBI theorized that the Russians created these documents, then fed them to certain people in U.S. intelligence and basically said, hey, here's a few MJ-12 documents. We've got plenty more. If you give us some more, we'll share with you some of our Russian UFO secrets. So in other words, it was like, sort of the donkey and the carrot, that the KGB were luring in certain people in U.S. intelligence to give them U.S. secrets, but in return, all they would get would be fabricated MJ-12 documents. Now, a lot of people might say, well, that's wrong, that's garbage, MJ-12 is real. But if you look at the time frame, and the Russians were trying to get information off us, we were trying to get information out of their guys, to create these documents and dangle them before people and say, hey, we got more of this, just give us a few more bits of information about the stealth program that you're working on. You could see how that could work. And you can also see how the FBI and the DIA might actually think they really had been created by the Russians,
No.
Now, regardless of whether or not that is the answer, for the DIA and the FBI, they were pretty sure that the documents were created by the Russians as a means to lure in U.S. people who they could manipulate.
Now, I've heard a lot of stories that Russia has had their own version of, like, say, Roswell, where we're not the only ones who supposedly recovered crashed discs. Did you talk a bit about that in the book?
Yeah, there's a few cases in the book about sort of crashed UFOs. I mean, a perfect example is a document that surfaced through the Freedom of Information Act from the National Security Agency. And this particular document goes back to the early 1952, early months of 1952. And the document talks about a crashed UFO off the island of Spitsbergen, which is just off the on the border with Norway. And the story is that this flying saucer, sort of classic 1950s flying saucer, crashed somewhere on the island of Spitsbergen in 1952. Now, this story was spread, well, actually nobody really knows who started the story, but U.S. intelligence were given the story, the Russians picked up on it, and in the declassified NSA, National Security Agency files on the Spitsbergen case, whoever was handling this file used like a pen to circle the relevant section and wrote right next to it the word plant. So somebody in the NSA knew that this story that the Russians were circulating about a crashed UFO was a plant. The NSA knew it was not a real story, that it was fabricated by the Russians as a means to try and convince U.S. intelligence that Russia had got alien technology in its hands. But it's clear from the released documents, which you can actually find this document I'm talking about now on the NSA's own website. They've put it up there so you can see it. So, we've got this angle too, crashed UFOs and rumors of crashed UFOs. And then, the further the NSA dug into it, they found that this was like a Russian fabrication to try and freak out U.S. intelligence into thinking that Russia had got, alien weaponry or whatever, when they actually hadn't.
They've been doing this for a long time, since the war, haven't they? When they were at war with Germany, they were feeding Hitler information, same sort of thing, because they knew Hitler had an interest in the paranormal and ufology. I cannot say UFOs. So. Well,
yeah, you're right. You're right that. Throughout, warfare for centuries, fabricated and manipulated stories have been fed in a way that seems innocent, but it's just designed to push the enemy down in a different avenue or just confuse the enemy so they don't know what the hell's going on.
Yeah. Yeah.
We spend a lot of time talking about the U.S. secrecy in Russia, and I don't think you have a book out on this yet, but have you ever looked into, let's face it, China is the next big superpower. And you don't hear a lot coming out of China, whether or not they're doing the same type of meddling, whether or not they've had...
China's got tight lips.
Yes, very, very tight lips. I was just curious if you've heard any information similar to what we're talking about with the U.S. and Russia coming out of China.
I have to say that personally I haven't. But, I mean, it wouldn't surprise me because... the whole point of, one nation sort of trying to get a one-up on the other one and manipulating the other, we know that it's been done in various ways in relation to various subjects. So the fact that we know that both, Russia and the US sort of, this manipulating of UFOs back then and still doing it now, it wouldn't surprise me at all, if something comes out from China which shows that, maybe they'd fed bogus material to the US, and it wouldn't surprise me, if they're doing something similar. I don't have any proof of it, but I mean, if you just look at the history of the way in which several nations have done this, it wouldn't surprise me at all if, another one like China was also doing it.
What is with all the books that, you've written a variety of books on the UFO subject or the different types of paranormal phenomenon that could be related to it. What, in your opinion, is the most intriguing aspect of this whole phenomenon? That something that really piques your interest?
Well, I think more than anything else, it's the way, for me at least, it's the way in which the UFO subject is clearly tied to the worlds of like the paranormal, the supernatural, and the occult. It's not, for me at least, it's not just about nuts and bolts aliens and somebody else's equivalent of NASA coming to the Earth. It gets into far deeper areas. I mean, if you look at sort of some Whitley Strieber's books, where he talks about the aliens or the visitors, as he calls them, being able to sort of extract the human soul and manipulate souls and some really weird, creepy stuff. So this kind of supernatural aspect where you have multiple strange phenomena all linked to ufology, which kind of John Keel's really kind of kicked a lot of this off, pointing out how so many of these phenomena that seem totally unconnected were actually connected after all. So for me, it's, I guess over the years, I've sort of come to believe or conclude that whatever the UFO phenomenon is, it's not just about nuts and bolts aliens and somebody else's equivalent of NASA and somebody else's equivalent of the space shuttle or whatever. I think there's something much weirder about it all. And I think that could explain why we don't get disclosure. I think if the big secret was just that, yes, okay, we did find a crashed UFO outside of Roswell and we got 5 or 6 bodies and they're stored away at Area 51, I actually don't think it would cause much of a problem if they released that, if it was declassified and we could all get to see the bodies, and they'd be, shown on the news and everything else. I don't think that would freak. I think it would amaze people. I don't think people would be running to the mental hospitals or whatever just because the government says aliens were found in the desert 70 years ago. What I do think, though, is that it might freak people out if the government said somehow the aliens are connected to the human soul. That kind of stuff could really, I think, disturb people. And I think it could be this weirder side of it that causes the silence, not the fact that we've been visited, but there are these really weird offshoots to the subject that nobody really knows on the inside how to handle it and tell people.
I also think it's the fact that when push comes to shove, they will never disclose it, or they won't disclose it because of the fact that these aliens, extraterrestrials, interdimensional beings, whatever it is that they are, which I think in a lot of ways it's far stranger and probably beyond our current ability to comprehend. But these things run circles around us. They, between their craft, what they're able to do to manipulate the human mind, and with screen memories and erasing memories, and there's so much. They're so far ahead of us. I think that the government won't reveal anything about it because they don't want the public to realize that there's not a damn thing they can do about it.
Yeah, you're right, and I think that's an important thing to note because we think, well, I don't think, but a lot of people think, those who are hiding all this are like evil bad guys. They're not. They are normal, regular people with families, and who barbecue at the weekend and watch their favorite TV shows with the families. They're normal people, but they're dealing with a subject which is so awkward and for them maybe even frightening. They don't know how to deal with it. They're not. I don't view any of these people as the bad guys at all. They're not, evil bad guys because they won't tell us. They won't tell us because they don't know how to tell us because it's such potentially a shocking revelation if the whole thing comes out. So, yeah, I mean, I kind of sympathise with the people who have normal lives, wife, husband, kids, dog and a cat. I have a lot of sympathy for these people because they're caught in a situation where they don't know how to handle the thing and don't know whether they should even disclose. And I wouldn't want to be in their position if I knew everything they knew.
It's a lot of weight to carry, isn't it?
Yeah, but the problem is again with ufology. Ufologists, I've seen this so many times, view the people hiding this as bad guys, as villains. I said, that image of like some old 1920s silent movie with the villain with his cloak and twiddling his moustache while the girl's tied to the railroad track. That's how they kind of view them. They're not. They're normal people with a really disturbing job. That's all it really comes down to.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, we are coming up towards the end of the show here. Just wanted to give you now. What's next for you? I'm sure you have another book or three on the horizon coming out.
Well, yeah, the next book actually doesn't come out till April, so it's be a while yet. But it's called Assassinations, and it's like a study throughout history, going from like Julius Caesar and the Egyptians to the present day of assassinations. Sort of political assassinations, you name it. So it's got lots of examples.
That's going to be a good book.
Yeah, it's like Julius Caesar, John Lennon, JFK, RFK, Martin Luther King, the theories, the sort of assassination theories related to Jack the Ripper, and also the several chapters in the book about people in ufology who've died under mysterious circumstances. So it covers a lot of ground, but the main theme is, people got whacked for getting too close to something.
Yeah, that's going to be a very interesting book. I'm going to buy that one.
Now, Nick, I know you make a lot of appearances at different conferences. I know we're coming up on the end of the year here, so are you planning on making any appearances here in the next couple of months? Anything you want to promote?
Yeah, I mean, I usually do about sort of 15 or 20 conferences per year, but what usually happens is, I get booked as the years go along. But the first one I'll be doing, it's called the Alien Snowfest at Big Bear Lake, California, in the last weekend in January 2020. And I'll actually be talking about the flying saucers from the Kremlin book at that event. And the Alien Snowfest is a good one. As I said, it's every year at Big Bear Lake, California, and they get a lot of good speakers in and a lot of variation. So, it's not just one subject. You've got 5 or 6 different people, maybe more, all talking about different aspects of the UFO subject. So that will be my first one of the year.
Fantastic. Well, Nick, thank you very much for coming on the show this week, as once again, you're so very much full of information and very entertaining to talk to. And we'll definitely, once you get a couple more of the books out, we'll have you back on, as usual.
All right. Thanks.
Especially when you've got the assassination book out.
Yeah, I'll let you know when I think it comes out early April. Sometimes it changes, sometimes a little bit before or after, but it'll be roughly early April when it should come out. So.
Okay, that's lovely.